the original title of my talk was Creativity Saves Lives, but I've done a last minute pivot. I've decided that how I can best help you and young female voices is by talking about how to find, own, and strengthen your voice. Because that is how we save lives, our own and that of others. So a month ago, I went from keeping my most private pains a secret for decades to sharing it with a room full of strangers, and then I posted it on YouTube and almost 4 million people watched it. I mean, it makes total sense, right? So how did I reclaim my voice to speak about what is most difficult for me after years of silence? And how can I help you find, own, and strengthen your voice? So, because I'm an emergency room doctor, this talk is going to be equal parts legit practical. Like, we're talking like take your Tylenol, legit practical. And dark humor, because that's me, but also serious, because I deal with a lot of serious stuff. So claiming your voice as a woman is just as important and urgent as ever. In Afghanistan right now, under the laws of the Taliban, women are banned from speaking, singing, and even laughing in public. They are prohibited from using their full voices, silenced by the laws of their country. And for those of us that are in these like free societies, that may seem extreme, but even we are self-silencing, influenced by patterns in our relationships and institutions. So when I stood on that stage a few weeks back, I shared for the first time my personal story of intergenerational violence at every single level of my family. So I was assaulted by my father at age 5, but I doubted that memory until my daughters were the same age, and then I felt compelled to find out what happened. So I requested my foster care records, and then at the back of the file, there was police testimony confirming that I was assaulted. Now, I wasn't planning to share this, but it's such a warm room here today, so my voice was actually ignored when I was 5. And it wasn't until a decade later when my father harmed other women and was convicted that, the truth came out. So that's why I'm here today, because I want to make sure that young women speak up, even if they're not heard the first time. I also, in that speech, talked about the most difficult aspect of my work as a female emergency room doctor and a humanitarian. I have witnessed the aftermath of a very heartbreaking number of assault cases from private violence. And when I say private violence, I mean household violence or domestic violence, sexual assault, and intimate partner violence. And despite how many cases I see, the evidence suggests we are missing up to 95% of all of the intimate partner violence cases in the emerge. So we are actually only picking up 5%, and I am part of that system. So our institutions, whether it's our families or hospitals or the policing system, they can inadvertently mistreat the people they are supposed to be helping and protecting. Our communities, whether it's in real life or online, can even go a step further and teach us to doubt ourselves and suppress what we know to be true. So it's really not very comfortable for me to speak about this out loud. Even as I was walking up to the podium that first time, I was like, am I really gonna tell this to a room full of strangers? And then again, I was sitting here at the lunch, I'm like, am I gonna do this again? And I'm like, what is wrong with me? Like, why am I doing this to myself? And then I'm like, no, I have to stay focused on what is wrong, like what is happening with society? How can I help lower the bar so that we can all speak about what is most difficult? Now, my young daughters, they have no difficulty outwardly expressing their opinions. So I had my eldest, she's 8. I'm like, can you look at parts of this speech, because there's gonna be teenagers in the audience this time, so like I need it to be even better this time, like funnier. So she read like some parts of it. And then she said to me, Mommy, your speech is boring. I was like, oh, thank you. Like, clearly it's not true. But it got me thinking, somewhere between when I was my daughter's age and now, like, how did I learn to, doubt myself, censor myself? Like, I would never say something like that now. And in fact, statistics show that girls, their self-esteem on average peaks at age 9 and then gradually declines throughout adolescence. So I was like, I guess I'm just another statistic. But I've reflected on how that happened to me, hoping it could provide insight to you today, okay? So in order to, I don't know about you, but like me, I do have ADHD, but however, every single day I lose either like my keys or my phone or both. And then to find those things, I have to literally stop myself in my tracks and be like, where did I last see that item of value? And there is nothing more valuable than refinding your voice. I had to stop myself in my tracks and literally sign up for a Zoom writing class to really dig in to figure it out. So maybe, you don't have to sign up for a writing class, but you have to make space in your schedule to relocate the internal locus that is you. And I would suggest for all of us, we could take a little bit of that time off of social media and invest that in refinding your own voice. So teen girls receive a median of 200 notifications per day. So this can create this like intense feeling of pressure, like to respond, because otherwise there's gonna be social repercussions. And on average, they say that teen girls can spend 8 hours on a screen and 5 hours on social media per day. And people who are my age, I know I'm already saying that kind of thing, my age, we love to shame people younger than us, but like we're not doing that much better. So when I took the time off of Wi-Fi, like unplugging the phone, turning it all off, 4 things came up for me that contributed to my self-silencing. 2 were from my childhood and 2 are still ongoing. So the first is that I was confused about these somewhat terrifying events in my childhood where one of my parents always made it seem like nothing had happened. And I realized later that's something called coercive control, which is when there's a repeated pattern of aggressive behavior that's never acknowledged. Secondly, in my childhood, I was raised in a rigid fundamentalist religion. So at the church, whether it was, in Sunday school or from the pulpit, I was taught that there's like only one way that we look at things. And even if you did kind of differ in your opinion, it had to be within a certain narrow standard deviation of what was accepted. And I actually hold a deep affection for that community that raised me, but I was really imprinted with this belief that there was really only one absolute truth that mattered. And ironically, in my adulthood, in medicine, I've actually been shaped into silence in certain ways with the culture of emergency medicine as well, because we are trained to suppress emotion, push through, because that's what the system demands. And it's not because people who are in the emergency room don't care. It's because we're trained to prioritize speed over connection. And the last thing that's contributed to my self-silencing is not at all unique to me. It's just with the way on the internet, there's sometimes a culture of anonymous tearing down. So, that can make anybody want to just stay silent because it feels safe. But even before the internet, there was a Harvard study, I'm sure many of you in the room have heard of it, on girls' development, where they found that girls aged 12 to 13 began to self-silence in order to avoid social backlash and maintain relationships. And the lead researcher of that study, her name's Carol Gilligan, she talks about this phenomenon as being like a loss of voice that correlates with a decrease in authenticity and self-expression. And there's been subsequent studies showing that by middle school, girls will stop putting up their hand compared to boys because they don't want to be perceived as bossy or too much. And then since then, there's been multiple other studies by Planned Canada, Dove, CDC, confirming that this silencing of girls is not just a phase, it is systemic. So when I was 16, I was a seemingly outgoing girl. However, that same exact time, I was running to be like Students' Union president, okay? And however, my personal life was going into shambles again, but I kept it all quiet. So my parents divorced, and then I didn't really know what was going on with my dad, but then news of his conviction was in the headlines in the front section of my local newspaper. And my family and my response to this deepest pain was to just try to pretend it wasn't happening, just not talk about it. And so I did that. There was before the internet, so I managed to bury it. And that felt okay until after 15 years as a humanitarian in the emergency room, seeing private assault case again and again and again, I realized that my silence was harming more than it was helping. Because the vast majority of my patients, when this happens to them, their response is, I will tell no one. So silence can sometimes be a sacred place to rest when something really terrible happens, but when it becomes prolonged and you can't even tell a single person, that's what I think has gotten our world into a mess. So I challenge you to think about what has happened in your life that has caused you to feel speechless. And you don't have to go around, you don't have to be like at a podium and talk about it, but develop a process of introspection. And that may mean disconnecting from modern technology. So I want to give you permission to turn your phone off, like fully off, okay? And I want you to recharge yourself as much as you recharge your phone. I'm like, people are giving more attention to plugging that thing in than themselves, right? Like their phone runs out of battery. They're like, I need a charger. Like I see it in the emergency. People get there and they're like, my phone's out of battery. And I'm like, that's okay. Like, how are you? How are you? It's okay. Your phone's gonna be okay. So I guarantee when you take that time to reflect on what's circulating between like your head and your heart and like not just everything that's on here, you are going to find your voice again. So once you have found your voice or you're starting to find your voice, how can you really own it? And I want to introduce you to a concept called owning your electric blue. Have any of you heard something like this or a version? Oh, yes, perfect, Irene, of course. She's from my doctor choir, that's why, that's where the concept comes from. So we were invited to sing on Canada's Got Talent, but like the average doctor, we're kind of like lifeless. I told you, the culturation of medicine is like to kind of leave your personality at the door. So our coach said to us, people have seen, teal and navy, but they want to see you plugged into your vibrancy. Like, show them what is your electric blue. And I was like, I don't know if I can do that anymore. And one of the judges was Lily Singh, who's one of my idols personally. And like we're born in the same decade, but she's just so much cooler than me. So I was like, I don't know if I could do this, but we did it. And we got four yeses or 4 stars, whatever. It's fantastic. But owning your voice will require radical acceptance that it is unique and there are no two voices in this world that are the same. How many of you have ever kind of listened to yourself on replay and thought, and kind of like cringed just a little bit, right? Like you're just like, oh, that's not how I thought I sounded. That's how I wanted to sound. Like I don't want to listen to this after, but that's fine. Yeah. So I am learning to embrace my electric blue, even as like a singer and a speaker. Like it's still even hard for me. So that's why I want to just really fully encourage you. And on that topic, you're going to hear these buzzwords, right? Like, especially if you do want to share with more than one person, like, well, the internet's kind of a crowded space. And then people will say, you're a woman, you should take up space. And then you're like, which is it? Like, is it crowded or should I take up space? Like, I don't know which one is it that I'm doing. And that's where just owning your story and your voice and your style means you're never going to be crowding anybody else out, right? That is what it means to take up space. But taking up space can sometimes mean that you fumble around a bit, like as you're figuring it out. Like even right now, I'm fumbling around a bit, but that's fine. So I gave the worst speech of my life when I was 16 to 2,000 teenagers at my high school. And I had a paper, and the paper was like right in front of my face. But even though like I looked over the paper and I could see the people yawning. And then they didn't have phones back then, but believe me, they wanted them. And then when I was done, like they barely clapped after, and it was like I was like a walk of shame down from there. I'm like, oh my God. But thank goodness for 16-year-old me, because she helped me to figure out what I needed to do better. So I probably learned more from that failed speech than I did from every other speech I have given after that. So we've tried to find our voice. We are trying to own our voice. We want to strengthen our voice. How are we going to strengthen our voice? So I am a very late blooming gym freak, like going to school forever, whatever, like didn't have time for that. So, the first time I went to the gym, I was kind of afraid. Like there's all those buff dudes, right, with the sleeve tattoos, and they're like grunting and strutting around like the only. I'm like, can they tell? Like, I don't even know how to move that thing up and down on like the weight machine. So I want to tell you that strengthening your voice, just like going to the gym, it is going to require repetition over and over again. And when you first start out, and I guarantee, I just saw somebody yawn. Darn it. I guarantee, thought I was doing better. I guarantee, and I know you're not going to expect that I'm going to say this about strengthening your voice, but strengthening your voice is equal parts difficult and awkward. That's what I'm going to tell you. It is awkward. Now, don't throw your cell phones at me. Like, I know this is not like a sanctioned part of a motivational speech to be like motivating young girls to find their voice and tell them it's going to be awkward. But, I have found my own electric blue unique voice, and ChatGPT didn't write this, so that's why I'm putting that in there. Now, once you have kind of owned, your awkwardness, then you get into the familiar terrain of what I like to call the boring territory. So anything that is worth it, especially when you're repeating something and finding your voice, there's going to be that little boring part. And don't even ask me how many drafts of my book I had to do before an agent or a publisher would even look at it. I had an early reader say to me, "Thank you for letting me read that first draft." And I was like, that is like my 15th draft. How dare you? But I'm not going to say that to you. And don't even ask how many times I kind of boringly went over this speech so it would just be slightly less boring for you. So, those are the secret things people don't want to tell you, right? They don't want to tell you like, "Oh, how did you memorize that speech?" I'm like, I went over it many times and I still forgot half of it, and that's fine. So I'm going to close. I want to thank you guys, because this repetition of talking about this most difficult thing for me was easier this second time than the first time. So repetition is what builds strength. I'm going to close by saying that we get stronger in community. So just like some people, they can work out at home and they're going to get stronger, some of us, we need to go to the gym, right? We need to be together and see other people doing it so that we can stay in the game and be consistent. People in the room here, like I look at Sabrina and other people and I see what they're doing and how strong they are in their voice. And sometimes you can look at that and you can be intimidated and want to shrink. But instead of that, we need to see that as inspiration to reach, to be our best version of ourselves, to always remember it's just you against you, trying to be the strongest version of yourself. However, just like kind of the harmony of a choir, when you find people whose messages align with yours, that can be the strongest amplification of your voice, which is what this represents to me, like FEMPOWER, the organization. Because when you get strong in your voice, that's when you can really uplift the voices of those who are just beginning to find their strength. And it's also when we remember to give voice to those that have been silenced. So I'm going to end where I began by saying that in response to the Taliban's laws, Afghan women have taken to singing online together as a direct act of defiance. Please always remember that sharing your voice, it is not just a personal act. It is a hard-earned right. We are standing on the shoulders of generations of women before us. Therefore, it is a responsibility and it is a form of power. And helping you find, own, and strengthen your voice is, for me, my next greatest expression of reclamation of my voice. So thank you. Thank you, Serena.